The first thing Francis Drayton noticed about Thomas Stratton was that he laughed without sound. It was not the absence of laughter. His shoulders moved, his eyes creased at the corners, his whole frame tilted toward the joke the way a plant tilts toward light, but the room did not register it. Lord Enderby's drawing room was full of people performing their wit for one another, each bon mot lobbed like a shuttlecock across the gilt furniture, and not one of them looked at the young man in the window seat who was laughing harder than anyone. Frances had arrived at Enderby Park that afternoon with her father, Sir Philip Drayton, whose friendship with Lord Enderby dated back to their years at Oxford, and whose invitations were accepted less for the society than for the trout stream that ran through the lower meadow. Sir Philip would spend the week thigh-deep in cold water, content as a heron. Frances would spend it navigating drawing rooms and dining tables, which she did with competence if not relish. She was 23, the eldest of 4 daughters, and she had learned years ago that competence was the quality most likely to be overlooked and least likely to be punished. It suited her. The Duke of Fernley she knew by reputation only. Lawrence Stratton had inherited young, his father dead of a fever when the boy was 17, and had governed his estates and his seat in the House of Lords with the sort of quiet efficiency that produced no gossip and therefore no fame. He was not handsome in the way that made women whisper behind fans. He was lean, sharp-featured, watchful, the kind of face that improved the longer one looked at it, which meant that most people, glancing once, did not bother. His brother Thomas she had not known existed until that first evening. Lord Enderby had mentioned him in passing during introductions, and Mr. Thomas Stratton, the Duke's brother, with the particular brightness that people used when they wished to demonstrate broad-mindedness while simultaneously signaling that broad-mindedness was required. Thomas had inclined his head. He was perhaps 20, fair where his brother was dark, and his eyes moved constantly, reading lips, reading faces, reading the architecture of every conversation that excluded him. He had been seated at the far end of the drawing room, near the window, with a glass of wine that no one had refilled. Frances watched Lady Thurston speak directly over Thomas's head to the woman beside him. She watched Lord Enderby's eldest son address a remark to the Duke that concerned Thomas, something about riding, whether Thomas still rode, without once looking at Thomas himself. She watched the Dowager Countess of Hale pat Thomas's hand as one pats a dog that is not bitten and does not plan to, and she watched Thomas's face during all of it. He did not appear wounded. He appeared accustomed, which was worse. Dinner was announced. Frances was seated between Sir Philip and a Mr. Goulding, whose sole interest was enclosure disputes in Lincolnshire. Thomas was at the far end of the table, beside Lady Thurston, who spoke to her left throughout the meal. Across from Frances, 3 chairs down, the Duke ate in near silence, spoke when addressed, and watched his brother with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that intervention makes things worse. Frances retired early that first night. She sat at the writing desk in her room and thought about the young man who laughed without sound and the room that could not hear him anyway. The following morning, she found Thomas in the breakfast room before anyone else had come down. He was reading, holding the book close to the light from the east-facing windows, and he startled slightly when she entered, the way one startles when the furniture rearranges itself without warning. She took the chair beside him rather than across, so that he could see her face without effort. "Good morning, Mr. Stratton," she said clearly and at a measured pace, facing him directly. "I hope you slept well." He studied her mouth, then he nodded. "Tolerably," he said. His voice was unusual, the vowels slightly flattened, the consonants precise, as though each word had been built by hand rather than inherited. It was a voice that had been trained with effort and maintained with discipline. And Frances understood immediately what that effort had cost and continued to cost every day in a world that would not meet him halfway. She did not slow her speech to the pace one uses with children. She did not raise her volume. She spoke as she would to anyone, and when he did not catch a word, she repeated it without impatience, and when repetition did not serve, she found another word. And when the conversation reached a point of genuine complexity, she had asked about his book, which was a treatise on botanical illustration. She drew a small notebook from her pocket, wrote her question in a clear hand, and slid it across the table. Thomas read it. He looked up at her with an expression she could not immediately name because she had not seen it on his face before. It was surprise, not at the content of the question, which was ordinary, but at the act of receiving it, at being addressed as someone whose answer mattered. He wrote his reply beneath her question. His handwriting was elegant, scholarly, better than hers. They talked, spoke and wrote in alternation, sometimes in combination, for 40 minutes before anyone else came down. They discussed Redouté's roses, the difficulty of illustrating stamens with botanical accuracy, whether watercolor or gouache better captured the translucence of petals, and the injustice of Linnaeus's naming conventions, about which Thomas held strong opinions and Frances held equally strong ones in the opposite direction. When Lady Thurston entered the breakfast room at 9:30, she found them bent over Frances's notebook, arguing, in silence, on paper, about the classification of ferns, and her face performed several complicated maneuvers before settling on polite confusion. The Duke came down at 9:45. Frances did not notice him enter. Thomas did. He glanced toward the doorway with the alertness of someone who tracks movement by habit, and whatever he saw in his brother's face made him return to Frances's notebook without comment. Lawrence Stratton poured his coffee, took a plate of eggs and toast, sat at the opposite end of the table, and said nothing. He said nothing that morning. He said nothing that afternoon, when Frances and Thomas walked the long gallery together, and she listened, truly listened, adjusting her pace, her position, her angle, as Thomas described the portraits of their family, each one carrying a story he had memorized because the house was full of stories no one told him. He said nothing at dinner, when Frances requested that her place card be moved so that she sat beside Thomas, and Lord Enderby's butler complied with the rigid face of a man who has been asked to do something irregular but not technically wrong. He said nothing when Frances unfolded her notebook at the table, and she and Thomas conducted a second written conversation alongside the spoken one that flowed around them, and the other guests glanced and looked away and glanced again. He said nothing for 7 days. Frances was aware of the Duke in the way one is aware of weather, present, ambient, impossible to ignore entirely. She felt his gaze during meals. She saw him standing at the far end of the gallery when she and Thomas examined the Stratton family collection. She noticed him on the terrace when she and Thomas sat on the stone bench with their notebooks, cataloging the wildflowers in the lower meadow by their Latin names, while Thomas sketched them with a pencil stub and a confidence that suggested he had been drawing all his life with no one to show. But he did not approach. He did not speak to her. He did not join them. On the second day, Frances wondered if he disapproved. On the third, she was certain of it. She said nothing of this to Thomas, whose happiness over those 3 days was so visible and so unguarded that it made something ache beneath her ribs. He had so much to say. That was the thing that struck her most forcefully. Not that he had been excluded from conversation, but that he had been carrying all these thoughts, all these observations, all this intelligence, with no one to receive them. He knew the name of every bird on the estate by its flight pattern. He had read more widely than anyone she had met in London. He had opinions about architecture, about farming methods, about the new proposals for drainage in the eastern counties, and he had held every one of these opinions in silence because the world had decided, when he was small, that his silence meant emptiness. It did not. Frances had known this within 10 minutes of sitting beside him. She could not understand how an entire household, an entire family, an entire society had failed to know it in 20 years. By the 4th day, the other guests had begun to watch. Lady Thurston remarked to the Dowager Countess, loudly enough for Frances to hear, that Miss Drayton appeared to have found her project for the week. Mr. Goulding asked Sir Philip, with the false casualness of a man who believes he is being subtle, whether his daughter had a particular interest in charitable work. Sir Philip, who understood his daughter better than most fathers, and liked her more than he sometimes knew how to say, replied that Frances's interests were her own, and suggested Mr. Goulding attend to his trout. The Duke said nothing, but Frances noticed that after Mr. Goulding's remark, the Duke left the drawing room and did not return that evening. On the 5th day, it rained. The house party was confined indoors, and Frances and Thomas spent the morning in the library. Thomas was showing her a volume of Audubon's birds, enormous, exquisite. Each played a small act of devotion, and he was explaining, through a combination of speech and writing and gestures so precise they constituted their own language, how Audubon had posed his specimens on wire armatures to capture the attitude of life, when Frances became aware that the Duke was sitting in the leather chair by the far window. He had a book open in his lap. He was not reading it. His eyes were on his brother's hands, Thomas's hands, which moved when he spoke the way other people's voices rose and fell, shaping emphasis, sketching meaning, filling the silence with a fluency that was not silence at all, but a different kind of speech. Frances had learned to read those hands over 5 days. She answered them now without thinking, her own gestures unconscious and instinctive. A nod here, a tilt of the head there, her hand reaching out to still his wrist gently when she needed him to wait while she wrote a longer reply. She did not know that the Duke was watching the place where her hand rested on his brother's wrist. She did not know that he had closed his eyes briefly, and that when he opened them, he had looked away. That evening, Frances told her father she believed the Duke found her company objectionable. Sir Philip, who had caught 3 brown trout that day and was in an expansive mood, regarded his daughter with the steady attention he usually reserved for river currents. Has he said so? He has said nothing at all. That is rather the point. A man who says nothing is not necessarily a man who objects. He may be a man who is thinking. For 5 days? Some things, Sir Philip said, require considerable thought. Frances was not persuaded. She had spent enough seasons in London to know that a duke who wished to speak to a woman found occasion to do so, and a duke who did not wish to speak to her found occasion to be elsewhere. The Duke of Fernley had done neither. He had remained present and silent, watching, and Frances could not determine whether she was being assessed or endured, and the uncertainty had begun to wear at her composure in a way she disliked. On the 6th day, she withdrew. It was not dramatic. She did not avoid Thomas. She would not do that to him, but she moderated her warmth. She sat beside him at breakfast, but kept their conversation shorter. She walked with him in the afternoon, but returned to the house before he did. She did not unfold her notebook at dinner. She was, in every observable way, a guest conducting herself with appropriate restraint, and if Thomas noticed the change, he did not say so, though his eyes followed her with a question she could not answer, because she did not understand the question herself. The Duke noticed. She knew he noticed because for the first time in 6 days, he looked at her directly. Not the ambient gaze she had felt like weather, but a focused, deliberate look across the drawing room after dinner when she was seated with her needlework and Thomas was at the window with his sketchbook, and the distance between them was 3 feet wider than it had been the evening before. The Duke's expression was not disapproval. Frances could not name what it was, but it was not disapproval, and the realization unsettled her more than disapproval would have done. On the 7th morning, the Duke came down to breakfast before Thomas. Frances was alone at the table. He poured his coffee, took his customary plate, and sat, not at the far end, but in the chair Thomas usually occupied, beside her. Frances's hand stilled on her teacup. "Miss Drayton," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, and carried the particular weight of words that have been chosen over many days from a much larger supply. "I owe you an explanation, and I find I cannot wait another hour to give it." "Your Grace," she set the teacup down because her hand was not entirely steady. "You owe me nothing. I owe you a week's silence, which you have interpreted as coldness, and I cannot allow that interpretation to stand." He paused. He was not a man accustomed to long speeches, she could see that, and the effort of assembling this one was costing him something. "I have been watching you. I am aware. I have been watching you with my brother." He looked down at his coffee, then up again, directly, with the gray eyes that improved the longer one looked at them. "May I tell you what I saw?" Frances nodded. She did not trust her voice. "On the first evening, you looked at Thomas for 11 minutes before anyone spoke to you. I counted. You were not staring. You were reading him, the way one reads a room for its currents before stepping into it. You saw what was happening to him before you decided to change it." He took a breath. "At breakfast the following morning, you sat beside him. Not across, beside, so he could see your mouth without turning. You had thought about the geometry of it. When he missed a word, you did not repeat it louder, the way everyone does, the way I have watched people do his entire life, as though volume were the issue and not comprehension. You found another word. And then you brought out your notebook, and you wrote to him. And Miss Drayton," he stopped. I've watched people try with Thomas. I've watched tutors and physicians and well-meaning aunts and charitable ladies from the parish, and they try with the particular energy of people who wish to be seen trying. You were not trying, you were talking. There is a difference so vast I cannot believe I must identify it, and yet in 20 years you are the only person I have seen who did not require the distinction explained. Frances's eyes were burning. She blinked and looked at the tablecloth. On the second day, you moved your place card at dinner. The butler told me. You did not ask Lord Enderby's permission. You simply did it, because the seating as arranged meant Thomas could not see your face, and the inconvenience to the table was less important to you than the inconvenience to him. On the third day, in the gallery, he told you about our mother's portrait, the one where she is holding the spaniel, and he told you that she used to sign to him before he learned to read lips, and you asked him to show you the signs. You did not ask as a curiosity. You asked as a student. I was at the far end of the corridor. He did not know I was there. Why did you not come closer? The words left her before she could govern them. Because I have spent 20 years watching people perform kindness toward my brother, and I would not, interrupt what you were doing until I was certain it was not a performance. His voice had gone very quiet. Thomas has been the subject of so many good intentions. Ladies who speak to him slowly for 10 minutes at a ball and then tell their friends how rewarding it was. Clergymen who pray for him in his hearing as though he were an affliction to be borne. Our own mother, God rest her, who loved him fiercely and never once asked him what he thought about anything, because she had decided when he was 3 that his thoughts were simple. They are not simple. You know that. You knew it in 10 minutes. It took his own family years, and some of them have not arrived there yet. He set his coffee cup down with a precision that suggested his hands, too, were not entirely steady. I watched for a week because I needed to be certain. Because Thomas has been hurt by people who meant well, and he has been hurt by people who meant nothing, and I could not bring another person into his life, into our life, who would begin with warmth and end with tolerance. I needed to see what happened when the novelty faded. I needed to see whether you would still unfold that notebook on the 6th day as you had on the 1st. Frances drew a breath. I did not unfold it on the 6th day. No, the Duke said. You did not. And that is when I knew. Knew what? That you had withdrawn because of me. Because my silence had made you uncertain, and your uncertainty had made you careful, and your care had cost Thomas 3 feet of distance across a drawing room that he noticed even if you did not think he would. He met her eyes. You withdrew to protect yourself. A woman performing charity does not withdraw. She redoubles. She makes a show of constancy because the show is the point. You pulled back because your feelings were involved, and that, Miss Drayton, is what I have been waiting a week to see. The breakfast room was very quiet. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck the half-hour. Through the windows, the gardens of Enderby Park were silver with early dew, and the long slope of the south lawn ran down to the willows by the stream, where Sir Philip was probably already standing with his rod, patient as the heron he resembled, waiting for what the river would offer. I have written to your father, the Duke said. This morning, before I came down. I should have spoken to you first, I know that, but I have spent 7 days in silence, and I found that once I began to act, I could not do it by half measures. He paused. I'm asking your permission to court you, not because of what you have done for Thomas, though that would be reason enough for any man with sense, because of who you are when you sit beside him, because the woman who argues about fern classification in a notebook at breakfast is the woman I wish to argue with for the rest of my life. And because Thomas, his voice caught barely a fracture so fine it might have been imagined, because Thomas deserves a sister who knows his language. He has waited long enough. Frances pressed her fingertips to the edge of the table. She had come to Enderby Park expecting a week of adequate company and tolerable dinners, and the quiet endurance that constituted her experience of country house visits. She had not expected Thomas. She had not expected the volume of everything he carried in silence. She had certainly not expected the Duke of Fernley to have been conducting, across 7 days of apparent indifference, the most careful and deliberate courtship she had ever witnessed, or was likely to witness, a courtship in which the woman being courted had not been the object of attention at all, but the subject of study, and the study had been not of her beauty or her dowry or her connections, but of her character, tested against the single measure that mattered to him, how she treated the person he loved most in the world. "Your Grace," she said, "you might have spoken to me on the second day." "I might have been wrong on the second day." "You were not wrong on the second day." "No," he said, "I was not, but I could not afford the possibility." She looked at him for a long moment. The sharp features, the gray eyes, the face that improved the longer one looked at it. "Then yes," she said, "you may court me. Though I should warn you that Thomas and I are in violent disagreement about Linnaeus, and I do not intend to concede." Something happened to the Duke of Fernley's face, something that began at the eyes and moved outward, the way light moves across water, and Francis understood that she was seeing a man who had held himself very still for a very long time, allow himself, for the first time, to move. "I would not ask you to," he said. Thomas appeared in the doorway. He looked at his brother sitting in his chair beside Francis, and his gaze moved between them with the quick intelligence that read every room he entered. Whatever he saw made him stop. Then his face broke into the wide, soundless laugh that Francis had first noticed across Lord Enderby's drawing room, the laugh that shook his shoulders and creased his eyes and tilted his whole frame toward the joy of it. He crossed the room and sat across from them. Francis slid her notebook across the table. She had already written, in the clear hand he knew as well as her voice, "He has asked to court me." I said yes. "You are not rid of me." Thomas read it. He picked up the pencil. Beneath her words, in the elegant scholarly script that was better than hers, he wrote, "I know. I told him to on the third day. He's merely slow." Francis looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at his brother. Thomas looked at them both with the serene satisfaction of a man who has arranged something without anyone's knowledge and intends to take full credit. They were married in September at the chapel on the Fernley estate, with the beech trees just beginning to turn and the light falling through the east windows in columns of amber and gold. Thomas stood beside his brother as witness. He did not speak during the ceremony. He did not need to. When Francis walked down the aisle, Thomas caught her eye and made a small gesture with his right hand, a sign she had learned from him during those mornings at Enderby Park, and she returned it without breaking stride. And the Duke, who saw everything, saw this too, and the vicar had to repeat the first question because the groom's eyes had blurred and he had not heard it. Mrs. Selway, the housekeeper at Fernley, had prepared the house with the meticulous care of a woman who had waited years for a mistress worth preparing for. She had known Thomas since he was born, had been the first member of the household to learn to face him when she spoke, and she had watched a procession of well-meaning visitors treat him with the bright, effortful kindness that left him more alone than silence would have done. When she saw Francis sit beside Thomas at the breakfast table and produce the notebook without ceremony, without performance, as naturally as breathing, Mrs. Selway had gone to the kitchen and stood by the window for several minutes, and when the cook asked if she was well, she said she was perfectly well, and would the cook please ensure that the south bedroom was aired for the new Duchess, the one with the morning light, because her Grace would want the morning light. Parr, the steward, was a practical man who measured people by their effect on the household's functioning, and his assessment of the new Duchess was formed within a fortnight. She consulted him on the management of the home farm. She asked informed questions about the tenants. She understood, without requiring explanation, that Fernley was not merely a house but an economy, and that the steward's role was not servitude but partnership, and that her role was to oversee without interfering, to understand without presuming, and to ensure that the people who depended on the estate were considered in every decision, not as an afterthought, but as the point. Parr reported to the Duke that her Grace was competent. The Duke, who had married her for reasons that had nothing to do with competence and everything to do with a notebook and a window seat and 7 days of watching, said that he was aware, and Parr, who was not given to sentiment, allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. The first year of their marriage was the quietest year Fernley had known in a generation, and also the fullest. Thomas took up residence in the East Wing, where Francis had installed a studio with north-facing light for his botanical illustrations, which were, she informed anyone who would listen, and several people who would not, the finest amateur work she had seen, and very probably the finest professional work too. She had written to Sir Joseph Banks's successor at the Royal Society about Thomas's drawings of native orchids, and the letter that came back, addressed to Mr. Thomas Stratton, not to the Duke, not to the household, was the first piece of professional correspondence Thomas had ever received in his own name. He kept it in the studio, pinned above his desk. Frances saw him touch the edge of it sometimes, the way one touches a thing to confirm it is real. The Duke watched all of this. He watched his wife stride across the estate in her Spencer jacket and half boots, conferring with Parr about drainage and fencing and the condition of the South cottages. He watched her sit with Thomas in the evenings, their notebooks between them, arguing, always arguing, about taxonomy and nomenclature, and whether Redoute had been a genius or merely very talented, a distinction Thomas considered critical and Frances considered absurd. He watched her place Thomas's drawings in frames and hang them in the morning room, where every visitor to Fernley would see them. And he watched Thomas stand before them with the expression of a man who has spent 20 years being invisible and has been, suddenly and without warning, seen. He watched, and he was not silent any longer. He told Frances what he observed. He told her at breakfast when Thomas was not yet down, and the morning light made the silver gleam. He told her in the garden, where she had planted a cutting from the roses at Enderby Park. He told her at night, in the south bedroom with the morning light she loved, when the house was quiet and Thomas was asleep in the east wing, and the only sound was the creak of the old beams settling and the occasional call of an owl across the park. "You have given him a country," he said once, and Frances, who did not cry easily and did not cry often, pressed her face against his shoulder and wept, because she had only sat beside a young man at breakfast and treated him as though he were interesting, because he was. Their first child was born in the second autumn, a daughter whom they named Philippa after Sir Philip, who had caught 4 trout the day he received the news and declared it the finest day's fishing of his life. Thomas drew the baby's portrait within hours of her birth, capturing with precise, tender strokes the crumpled face and the tiny fists and the expression of absolute outrage at having been evicted from somewhere warm, and Frances hung it in the morning room beside his orchids. Their second child, a son called Martin, arrived 2 years later, and it was Martin who first reached for Thomas's hands, not to hold them, but to watch them. Thomas had developed, over the years of Frances's presence, a fuller language of gesture, refined and expanded through their daily communication, and Martin, who could hear perfectly well, found this language fascinating. By the age of 3, he was using Thomas's signs alongside his words, switching between them with the fluid ease of a child who does not understand that the world considers one language real and the other a compensation. Philippa learned too. So did Mrs. Selway's niece, who came to help in the nursery. So did Parr, though he confined himself to practical signs, come, go, yes, no, the weather is turning, and performed them with the stiff dignity of a man who has been persuaded to do something undignified and intends to do it well. By the time Philippa was 7 and Martin was 5, the household at Fernley had become something that visitors noticed and could not quite name. It was not that Thomas was accommodated. Accommodation implies a problem being managed. It was that Thomas was present, fully, entirely, unremarkably present. The table was arranged so he could see faces. The servants faced him when they spoke. The children moved between words and signs as naturally as they moved between English and the schoolroom, French their governess insisted upon. Thomas was not a problem that had been solved. He was a person who had been included, and the difference, the vast, simple, obvious difference that had taken an entire society 20 years to fail to grasp, was visible in every room of the house. Frances and Thomas still argued about Linnaeus. She still had not conceded. On the evening of their 5th wedding anniversary, the Duke of Fernley found his wife in the morning room, standing before the wall of Thomas's illustrations. There were dozens now, orchids, ferns, the roses from Enderby, the willows by the stream, Philippa's portrait from infancy, Martin sleeping in his cot, the old spaniel that Thomas had adopted and drawn repeatedly in attitudes of noble repose. The morning room had become, without anyone designing it, a gallery of one man's attention to the world, proof, if proof were needed, that a mind excluded from conversation is not a mind without things to say. Frances was holding a letter. The Royal Society had invited Thomas to present his illustrations at a formal exhibition, not as a curiosity, not as a charity case, as a contributor. "He will be terrified," she said. "He will be magnificent," the Duke replied. Frances looked at her husband, the sharp features, the gray eyes, the face she had been looking at for 6 years now and which still improved the longer she looked. "You watched me for a week," she said, "before you spoke." "I did. What would you have done if I had been performing?" He considered this. "I would have thanked you for your kindness to my brother. I would have ensured Thomas was not hurt when the performance ended. And I would have continued alone." "You would not have married." "I would not have married." He said it simply, without drama, as a fact about the weather. "Thomas is the measure. He has always been the measure. Not because I am selfless, I am not, but because the way a person treats someone who cannot benefit them is the only evidence of character that cannot be faked. Everything else is negotiable. That is not." Frances folded the letter and placed it on the table beside Thomas's latest drawing, a study of clematis, the petals so finely rendered they appeared to tremble. "I did not sit beside him to pass a test," she said. "I know. That is why you passed it." The morning room was quiet. Through the windows, the park stretched away to the south, the beech trees fully turned now, copper and gold against the gray October sky. Somewhere in the house, Philippa was practicing her scales on the pianoforte, each note arriving with the determined imprecision of a 7-year-old who has been promised pudding if she finishes. Somewhere else, Martin was signing to Thomas's spaniel, who could not understand the signs, but wagged his tail regardless, because the attention was the point, not the comprehension. Thomas was in his studio, preparing for an exhibition he did not yet know would change the way 300 people in a London gallery understood what silence contained. He was arranging his drawings in the order he wished them to be seen. He was not arranging them chronologically or by species. He was arranging them by feeling the quiet ones first, then the vivid, then the ones that made him most afraid, because those were the ones that mattered. He did not know yet that when he arrived at the exhibition, Frances would be beside him, that she would carry the notebook, the same notebook refilled twice now, the leather cover softened with years of handling, and that if he needed her, she would write for him. And if he did not need her, she would stand beside him anyway, because standing beside someone is not the same as speaking for them, and she had understood the difference from the beginning. He did not know that the Duke would stand at the back of the gallery and watch, as he had once watched from the far end of Lord Enderby's drawing room, and that this time the watching would not be a test but a prayer. The particular prayer of a man who has been given more than he knew to ask for and is afraid, even now, to believe it will last. It lasted. They arrive here like a hand held still until it is understood whenever they are ready.